Well, we have another transmission we're working on here, guys. This video is actually going to be an introduction video. In my past rebuild videos, transmission rebuild videos, I got a lot of the same questions from a lot of different people, so I'm making this video in an effort to sort of preemptively answer those questions. So this transmission is an A727 or A904 transmission. This one is out of a 95 Dodge Dakota. It's actually my landlord's transmission for this shop. We kind of have a little deal going where he's giving me free rent for quite a long time for me rebuilding this thing. So I pulled this and I power washed it. Before I power washed it, I sort of plugged up all the holes. There's a lot of holes everywhere on this thing. Well, there's probably like 4 or 5 holes. So I got these plugs. So I got these little rubber plugs or rubber stoppers. Kind of had a hard time finding these at first, but eventually, I found them in Home Depot. They called them rubber stoppers. I was calling them rubber plugs, but then when I realized they called them rubber stoppers, they have them in all different kinds of sizes. And these are good for just plugging up those holes so that when you power wash it, you don't get water going in everywhere. Now, it doesn't really matter because, you know, you're taking the thing apart, but I still don't like to get water inside of it. I always worry about the steel parts. So I did that. I got it mostly cleaned up. I got most of the, all the cake dirt is off. It still needs some cleaning, but you want to make sure it's mostly clean in terms of there's not going to be huge chunks of dirt flying everywhere when you're removing and disassembling this thing. So that's the first thing you want to do. Now, when you're rebuilding the transmission, a lot of the times, well, first of all the time, you're going to need the transmission rebuild manual or the factory service manual. Even in videos, series like this, where I'm going through everything, you still want to get the manual because it has all the information you could ever need in it. So a lot of the times you can actually just find these on the internet. So I found it on the internet. It was very easy. I typed in A904 transmission rebuild manual, pop right up, PDF, and I printed it out, and it's got everything I need, all the specs and information, things of that nature. And you want to do this and print it out. It's better to, you can have it on the computer, but trust me, in my experience, you know, you're going to have dirty transmission oil filled hands, and you want to just have something paper, so you know you don't want to get that stuff on your computer or tablet or whatever you're using. So definitely always do that, even with the videos. Some other questions that's come up is where do you get parts from? Transmissions obviously are kind of a niche sort of thing, however you say that. So you can't really just go to an auto parts store and pick up these parts. So a lot of the times you can go to transmission parts websites, you know, whatever it takes, transmissions, Cobra Transmission, I think was one of them. There's a whole bunch out there, websites that specifically cater to transmission rebuilders. If in those cases it fails, you can always go to the dealer. And now the dealer, again, not many people come in asking for transmission parts. So what you need to do when you go to the dealer asking for parts is you need to bring the manual. So you go in with the manual and you talk to the guy and you say, hey, I need this part right here. And you bring in the manual with the explosion diagram because they can bring up those same explosion diagrams. And then it turns into a matter of just looking at both of them and seeing which part you need, rather than you don't need to talk transmission. You don't need them to talk transmission. You know, don't try to impress anyone. Just bring in the explosion diagram. It'll make your life easier and make their life easier. Some of the parts you get in a transmission, they're selective, meaning when you do rebuild, these transmissions are held to very tight tolerances, and they're tight in a way that when you mass produce parts, they're made within in a tolerance in terms of thicknesses and things of that nature that are plus or minus a few thousandths of an inch. Well, those few thousandths of an inch matter in transmissions, and to compensate for the differences in parts when you buy new parts, you need to get selective washers or spacers. And those have their own part number, and again, when you go to the dealer or website, you have to, type in which washer you want, or tell the guy, I need this washer, point to the diagram. So it should come up with a whole different bunch of selections you can choose for thickness. You pick the thickness you want based on your measurements, and there you go from there. So speaking of measurements, you're going to need some sort of measurement tools or machinist tools. I just have this one out here because I'm going to use it. But things like dial indicators with magnetic bases to measure end play, calipers in terms of measurement calipers. Sometimes you even need micrometers. You need these machine tools sometimes to take these measurements because these are built within very strict tolerances, and you need tools, high precision measurement tools that can actually measure these tolerances. So that's something you'll also need for rebuilds. Other tools you'll need, a lot of the times in transmission work you need special tools. And a lot of the times this concept of special tools throws people off. They'll say, oh, I need a special tool, I don't want to get special tools, blah blah blah. Well, actually, the truth of the matter is a lot of the times you can get away without the special tools. In cases where you can't, many times you can make the special tool. If you've got any sort of skill with a welder, you don't need any skill at all. You can make these special tools. I've even made special tools out of wood. You can just get creative. You can make these tools most of the time. So for special tools, if you need to buy one, if you can't make it or you can't figure out a way to do it without it, eBay is a pretty good source depending on what transmission you're working on. All you need to do is type in the part number, and a lot of the times they'll come up real cheap. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you work on transmissions. You're going to need the special tools. So another thing is gloves. If you're going to use gloves, I like using gloves, and everything, just because it's mostly just because I hate washing my hands. It's because the hands are really annoying. They got all the wrinkles, all the dirt gets in the wrinkles, and it's hard to wash. You can use like a thinner, like a kerosene, that works really well. You can use the Gojo stuff, but I just hate doing it. I'd rather just take my gloves off, have nice clean hands, and keep walking. But if you're going to use gloves, use these kind of gloves. I don't have any left, so I'm not using any gloves today, but you use these kind of gloves, the Nitrile gloves. And the reason why I say that is the Nitrile gloves are chemical resistant. If you use like latex gloves, they sort of swell up and rip, when they get soaked in transmission fluid. And when you're working inside the transmission, you don't want to have like little bits of glove that have been ripped on the sharp gear teeth or anything of that nature floating around. So best practice, don't wear any gloves. If you're going to wear gloves, wear these Nitrile gloves, and make sure they're real thick. These are the thickest ones I can get, the 9mm. I love these. They're real thick. They hardly ever rip. And when they do, it's not like it's just a little tear. They're great. I've even reused them because they're thick enough to do it. So get these kind of gloves. I got these at Harbor Freight. So either no gloves or thick Nitrile gloves. So I think that's all I need to say in terms of preliminary stuff and general transmission information. Let's start tearing into this thing. My landlord said that the deal with this is if you let it sit for about a week or so, or even like a couple days, it wouldn't really go into gear. After a little bit, it would finally go into gear. So it was a delayed engagement. He would say the same thing about when driving it. He would drive it. If it goes from first to second or third to fourth, I forget which one it was. It might have been both. It would, instead of shifting right to it, it would just shift out of the current gear. The engine would, freewheel without any load, and then it would just grab into the gear and, you know, be another delayed engagement. And pretty much all that to me sounds like the valves in the valve body are sticking. A lot of the times in older transmissions you get a lot of particulates in the transmission fluid. If you don't take care of the transmission fluid, it can cause actually the particulates act as sort of an abrasion and will actually cause the valve body bores to wear, and they wear in such a way where they get rough enough to where the valve doesn't slide back and forth. So another thing he said was that when it heats up it was fine, and that makes sense because the valve body will expand when it heats, and that allows the valve to move more freely because the bore has expanded just ever so slightly enough to let it move. So it sounds mostly like sticking valves in the valve body. You know, you could just pull the valve body and you know, polish them up. I'll show that process later, polishing up the valves, the valve body bores. But you know, he said, "Oh, you know what, Matt? Just pull it and just do a whole transmission rebuild." So because it's pretty old. So that's what we're gonna do. Let's get started. You know, thanks for watching this intro video. I know a lot of guys will skip it, but you know, there's a lot of good information, and I'm glad to have a video that I can point back to and say, watch this one for questions on transmission and information on transmission rebuilding. So thanks for watching. Let's go ahead and crack this open and continue on to part 1.